I've got here the Klein Tools Katapult 11063W. I have two pairs here because one of them has the jaws that the wire strippers come with. This one has a set of jaws that you can change out. These jaws right here are made for finer gauge wire. It is Klein Tools part number 11074. Basically, this one can go from 8 gauge up to 22 gauge, depending on solid or stranded. And this one can go from 16 gauge up to 26 gauge, and is intended for stranded wire. These are a good set of wire strippers. They have this kind of clicking mechanism that does a good job at ejecting the insulation. They do, however, have a little bit of a caveat about how they work. Now, the jaw shape on this larger one is more favorable if you are doing that, because you can get the wire sitting right there in the jaw. Now, the action here, you'll see, got the wire sitting right there in the jaw. It gets pinched by that back one, by the back bit here, kind of gripped in place. Then as you squeeze, it tightens down here, it pulls, and now you can see we have a nice clean strip. And if we give it a little bit of tension and pull it out, we'll have a nice, very, very clean strip. But let's see what happens. We also have a wire cutter here. Let's see what happens if we are a little slower and more careful. We can end up with a situation where it kind of jams it back in, and we end up with the end of our brush or our exposed strands there getting damaged, getting kind of smashed around. It's not quite as prevalent on the bigger jaws, but it is much worse on the smaller jaws. Let me show you the smaller jaws. This is a 22 gauge Teflon insulated wire. And if we get it, another thing I don't like about the smaller jaws, I feel like the shape here, you have this nice cup that the wire can sit in, but that's on the jaw that's moving. Whereas this one, the cup shape is harder to get into. If the shape of these two these two sides was reversed, this set of jaws would be 5 times more useful than it is. Okay, so we've got that nice clean strip, but then it jams it in, and now we've got this dirty mess. And if you're trying to get this stuck into an appropriately sized crimped contact, then now you've got this damaged brush that won't really work good, and depending on what IPC spec you might be building to, might even mean that you can't use it and you have to try again. Now, one thing we can do, pull, and then if we just pull back as we do it, we can kind of save it. But it is something that takes a little bit of technique. It's not just automatic. My biggest complaint with these wire strippers is probably the lack of a depth stop. I'm going to show you, that was Teflon insulated wire. This is some 24 gauge PVC insulated wire. Again, these small jaws, it can be kind of tedious to get it sitting in there just right. Again, we've got that. Another thing to note, we can get a little bit of damage on our jacket there, or on our insulation. And depending on the spec that you're building to, that may or may not be allowable. That might be a problem. But for most, maybe like 620 class 2, this is probably an acceptable strip. But again, if you're stripping this to go into a crimp contact, you'll have a depth tolerance, and there's no depth gauge or depth setting tool for the strip here. So this really, for more like tinned ends or maybe a looser spec or something, kind of simple, not quite so much for a really technical application. I wouldn't use these if I were pinning connectors and the like. Last one I was going to show you is, this is a 26 gauge TPU jacket. If we're very careful here. Same thing, the TPU jacket and this fine wire, it beats up the wire a little bit more. Other than that, these are pretty straightforward. I'm going to show you how to replace and remove the jaws here. So we're just going to pull out that screw, pull off that top plate. For this one, you can see there's this little arm here. We have to pull it kind of out. It normally sits, this arm right here sits down in that little slot, and we have to kind of pry it out of there. We're going to grab the original size jaws and put them on, and put the 11074 jaws back in their bag. Now to do this, first we're just going to get this guy, his little tang sitting in there. We're going to pull the handle down a little bit until it sits right in its hole. Then we can get that jaw sitting right where it's supposed to go. Need to get the plate in where it goes. There we go. Okay, now we don't want to tighten these up too much. I would get them just to where they just barely stop with hardly any pressure, and then just a hair past that. And you may test it and find that that is even still too tight. Now it looks like we've got it basically perfect. Now, one thing to note, you can strip it just a little ways and then back it off, and it'll just open. You only get that catapult sling action if you go all the way and then release it. That really happens when you've gone all the way on the action.